This is probably the most underrated Godzilla movie ever. Welcome back to my 2 cents, everyone, and today I'm finally continuing Godzillathon. It's only been, 3 months? This is my totally unoriginal series where I review every Godzilla movie in order, starting from the original all the way till Godzilla x Kong the New Empire, and maybe Godzilla minus zero depending on how long this takes. And now we're on to the first sequel to the original film, and that is Godzilla Raids Again, or Gigantus, the fire monster if you're a dirty American. This will be the first of many sequels to the original film to come, and it's also the first time that Godzilla actually fights another monster. This film was put into production only a few months after the release of the original film, just to capitalize on all its success, with a new director and only half the budget of the original film. And even with that, they still managed to make a pretty decent sequel to Ishiro Honda's original masterpiece, and what I consider to be the most underrated Godzilla movie ever. Starting off with the characters, we have Shoichi, a pilot that works for a fishing company in Osaka. He's just a nice man who is in a relationship with the fishing company's head dispatcher, Hidemi. As I stated in my previous Godzillathon review, I won't be going very in depth with the human characters because, one, you're not here for the human characters anyway, and I just don't think there's much to talk about with the human characters in these first few films. Shoichi's a fine character, but that's really all I have to say about him. Some kinda goes for Hidemi. She is just Shoichi's love interest who's also the plane dispatcher. Again, her acting is fine and she seems nice, but that's all I really have to say about her. Kaji is a slightly more interesting character because he is the pilot that Shoichi is sent to rescue after his engine fails and he crash lands on a strange island, where they end up discovering Godzilla and Anguirus. He's mostly there for comedic relief, but he does have a little side story there where he keeps asking Hidemi what do girls like and just how to pick up girls and stuff, implying that he's trying to ask a girl out. We'll talk more about that side plot in the story segment, but Kaji is probably the most memorable character in this whole movie because he is the only main character that dies. I say probably because Dr. Yamane from the first movie shows up to explain Anguirus and to say that there is just no way to kill Godzilla at this current moment. Dr. Yamane was the guy on Odo Island that was checking for radiation until they found Godzilla on Odo Island in that iconic scene. His acting in Raids Again is just as great as in the original, but he doesn't get much to do because, well, he's a borderline cameo. Like most Godzilla movies, the human characters are decent, just not memorable. I will say Kaji is kind of memorable for this movie, and Dr. Yamane is an iconic character in the Godzilla franchise. So the story of Godzilla Raids Again is, not long after the events of the original film, looking for some fish, a man named Kaji crash lands his plane in the middle of the ocean by some island. His friend and co-worker Shoichi sees this and lands on the island to rescue him. But while on the island, both of them not only discover that there is another Godzilla, but another giant monster that is fighting this new Godzilla. After this, they report this to the government and Dr. Yamane, and they determine that this second kaiju that they found on that island was an Ankylosaurus, another dinosaur that has been mutated by the results of radiation, and they name it Anguirus. And we'll talk more about him in a minute in the kaiju segment. They also determine that this new Godzilla is just another member of the same species that the previous Godzilla was, that I guess was just hiding out on this island during the events of Gojira. And since they used the only one surefire way to kill Godzilla, and the inventor of said weapon is also dead, there is no current way to kill this Godzilla. So they just decide that if Godzilla ever attacks, they'll black out the city and use some flares to make him go away. Because Godzilla apparently hates bright lights. Because, the bombs. It's a Godzilla movie, so of course Godzilla eventually does come to shore in Osaka, and the city issues a city-wide blackout. And the flares they're using to draw him away seem to actually be working, until a bunch of convicts decide to escape custody during the blackout and eventually crash a car into what I can only assume is just a giant tank of oil or something, which of course causes an explosion. Just feeding the stereotype. And now that Godzilla has seen and heard this big explosion, he just turns around and starts to attack the city. Also, due to these flares that the military were using to make Godzilla go away, they inadvertently attracted Anguirus. And now we get the first of many awesome kaiju battles to take place in the franchise. I'll talk more about this fight later. After Godzilla wins, of course, our main characters are having dinner until they're informed that Godzilla has started to attack more ships, and the government needs their help trying to track down Godzilla. During this dinner, Kaji mentions to Hidemi that he has fallen fallen in love with a girl. And in typical romance fashion, before he could say who it is, they're of course informed that Godzilla is attacking boats and they need to help. Before Shochi and Kaji head off on their mission, Kaji leaves a notebook behind at Hidemi's desk that, unbeknownst to her, has just a picture of her in it, which obviously implies that she was the woman that Kaji was falling for. And the movie frames this as like a tragic and sad moment for her, but bitch, I'm pretty sure you're with Shochi. Also, I know things were different back then, but is it not weird to have a picture of a woman in any way that is not related to you or that you're in a relationship with just in a notebook? Anyways, they find Godzilla and they have to keep him on this little island of ice until the military gets there. And while trying to keep Godzilla's attention, Kaji gets hit by Godzilla's atomic breath and crashes into the mountain. It is a sad death, but if you really think about it, he was kind of a creep. His crash causes an avalanche, which gives the military and Shochi a good idea to bury Godzilla in ice. And after like 5 minutes of planes bombing mountains to cause ice avalanches, Godzilla finally gets covered in ice, ending the movie. Sure, it's not as good of a story as the original or as profound, but I thought this story was very easy to follow. And I was actually kind of sad when Kaji died. Also, the fights between Godzilla and Anguirus are awesome, and they make Godzilla just as scary, if not scarier, than the original Gojira. Let's talk about the special effects of raids again real quick. They may not seem as impressive as the original, but they continue to improve the quality and comfortability of the effects in this sequel. One of the more important things they improved were the suits themselves. Due to the use of lighter materials, such as using a cloth base under some latex, the suit actors were able to move around more fluidly, which is very evident by the fight scenes. They also added a motor inside of Godzilla's head in this, to control the eyes and mouth of the suit without the suit actor having to do anything with that, which would become a pretty popular method in suits in the future. And in the case of Anguirus' suit actor, he was crawling around on his hands and knees, of course, but one thing they noticed is his feet were sticking out of the bottom of the back legs of the suit. And they used the buildings and other rubble that they had from the destruction, as well as probably depending on the black and whiteness of the movie, to hide his feet. If you're just as autistic about Godzilla as I am, then you would know that the suit actors would always have a hard time destroying any of the buildings on set, due to how sturdy they were built. But in the case of the Osaka castle, it was particularly difficult. The suit actors would literally ram full force into this miniature castle, and it would not fall. And unfortunately, in one instance, the crew didn't hear the director say cut, and the castle collapsed. Some people definitely did not get paid. And something I didn't even know about the castle before researching for this video is that there were multiple wires that were like connected to the castle to help them knock it down by having the crew like pull on them. Just goes to show how tough these sets were. One last fun fact before I talk about how good the effects were for the time. Since there was essentially a big ass motor on Haru Nakajima's head whenever he was in the suit, every time he had to jump or do some sort of like crazier movements in the suit, he would hit his head on the motor, which I'm sure you can imagine was painful. The effects continue to be impressive for the time, and again, to people that aren't such big fans of suitmation, it's gonna look bad to them. But to me, these effects look very good for the time and with the resources they were given. Now let's talk about the kaiju in raids again. Of course, we have Godzilla here once again, played by Haru Nakajima. This design has actually become a lot more popular as of recently due to its use in a couple of fan-made analog horror stories made here on YouTube, namely Unknowingly's Man in the Suit and the Suitmation Trials. I'm sure at least a few of you have seen this horrifying image, and maybe some of these. It may be because of these analog horror stories, which you should totally check out, by the way. But one of the reasons I think this movie is so underrated is because of how scary Godzilla is in this movie in particular. He's definitely not the scariest, but there are some days where I actually think this design is scarier than the original. He bares his canine teeth while keeping those crazy eyes of the original design. He's also a lot more slim and fast. Nakajima definitely got to put his studies of different animal attack patterns patterns to use in this movie. Because every time that Godzilla and Anguirus would fight in this movie, it looked like two bears fighting. It's a fighting style that I wish we would have seen more of, honestly, in the Godzilla franchise. I know there are other fast Godzillas, but their fighting style doesn't feel as animalistic as this Godzilla. This is also the first Godzilla that has kissed someone. Okay, that was just a behind the scenes photo, but if I had $1 for every time I've seen a Godzilla rizzing up a lady, I'd have a weird amount of dollars. Let's talk about Anguirus for a little bit. Anguirus is a very popular kaiju in the Godzilla franchise and is mostly known for being Godzilla's best friend. And he was originally played by Katsumi Tezuko. Funny how Godzilla and Anguirus would come to be allies, considering he's the first kaiju that Godzilla ever fought. Just like how I feel about Godzilla's design in Raids Again, I think this design for Anguirus is also pretty underrated. He doesn't have that dog-like, lovable face that future adaptations would use. Instead, this Anguirus has soulless eyes and a jaw that kind of reminds me of a Gariel. Seriously, is it just me? Not to say I don't love the versions of Anguirus we would come to get later on, but this is the only Anguirus I think I can say is kind of intimidating. Overall, I love Godzilla and Anguirus' designs in Raids Again. They aren't my favorites or anything, this Godzilla isn't even in my top 10, but I really liked these suits. Now for the That's Money segment, it should be a no-brainer. It's the fight between Godzilla and Anguirus in Osaka. It's the first time Godzilla fights another kaiju, the fight is long and brutal, and it's just entertaining to watch. In the future, I'm going to try to pick scenes for Godzillathon that aren't just monsters fighting for the That's Money segment, because not only does that feel too obvious, but there are some Godzilla movies that are more than just monsters fighting. But if a giant monster fight is all the movie has to offer, then I'm going to pick that anyway. Overall, guys, I think Godzilla Raids Again is definitely the most underrated Godzilla movie, and a solid sequel to the original Gojira. The human story and characters is definitely not as entertaining or even as good as the original film, but that's most of the human characters and stories in the franchise. The fight between Godzilla and Anguirus is awesome, and although not as much as the original, I think the effects still hold up. So if you are a Godzilla fan, I would definitely say that Godzilla Raids Again is worth a physical copy if you can find one for a good price. And for people that are trying to get into the Godzilla franchise, I would just say that this is worth a few dollars on a streaming service. And that's my review of Godzilla Raids Again. I hope you guys enjoyed this installment of Godzillathon. I'm sorry it took so long to continue it. I'm going to try to make Godzillathon reviews come in more frequently, but I can't guarantee how often I'm going to release the reviews. The hope is to review all the Godzilla movies before -0, but at this rate, it's probably not going to happen. Anyways, be sure to like the video and subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss the rest of Godzillathon or any of my future reviews. Go check out my review of Gojira, which was the first episode of Godzillathon, of course, if you haven't already, and give me your 2 cents on Godzilla Raids Again in the comments below. I love you guys, and I will see you very soon.